Welcome to the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. This is your host, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, helping business owners create financial freedom faster by mastering the language of money. Want to see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom? Complete our 40-point financial performance scorecard at wealthhealthcheck.com.au. That's wealthhealthcheck.com.au. The average score for most business owners is 18 out of 40. So complete the scorecard now and see how well you're tracking towards financial freedom.
G'day guys, Jackson Milan, the Wealth Mentor, and we're here for another episode of Financial Freedom Secrets. I've got a good friend of mine here, Matt Jones from the Site Shed and the Web Guys, who is an absolute master of marketing for trade businesses. Now, over the last few years, we've had an abundance of trade clients reaching out to us to get their financial shit sorted. They've been running great businesses. They've been working really hard. They've been scaling teams, and they basically just found themselves in a financial mess that they haven't had much to show for it, or they haven't been making their hard-earned work as hard as they could. And once we sort through all of that stuff, we typically find that they've been growing their business off word of mouth and referrals. They've been wearing that as a bit of a badge of honor. And they have this kind of resistance towards doing online advertising and marketing. I know from first-hand experience, it's the crux of creating a scalable and predictable business. So I wanted to get the master himself on this podcast so we could pick his brain, share some of his genius, and hopefully help you tradies sort out your growth trajectory so you can have more predictability around your business growth and your profitability using marketing strategies. So Matt, thanks for joining us, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, great. Very well. And it's nice to be on your show. I know you're on my show back on April 6th, which was fantastic and well received. So likewise, I think the message you guys preach to, the general business community, super relevant. Obviously, my exposure is pretty limited to the trades, but it's a very common conversation with trade businesses. And coming from a trade background myself, formerly a plumber, that education on the financial side of the business is something that you're never taught when you are going through your trade qualification course, regardless of where you are on the planet. The onus really becomes on you to go and invest in the education and those sort of things. And it's the same with marketing, in truth. Like, you're not supposed to know it. Like, it's something you have to learn. And so, of course, we're kind of preaching to the choir here today, speaking to people that want to learn. But I suppose the premise is, you do have to get off your couch and you've got to go and find this information that's relevant to whatever areas of your business that you are looking to improve and scale. For you guys out there that have gone down, the path with Jackson on the financial education and literacy, side of the business, I think it's just the most paramount aspect to growing a sustainable business, and one that I definitely did not do initially, purely through ignorance, just not knowing what to do or who to turn to. And I learned through the School of Hard Knocks, and, that whole Profit First program that you guys preach and, you've developed is just, I think it's just the most, it's been the biggest turning point in our business over the last, 3 to 4 years.
I agree with that, mate. Look, I think there's really 3 things that trade businesses really need to master, and it's scary for them. It's money, it's marketing, and it's management. And those are the things that they don't teach at trade school. Your boss typically doesn't bloody teach you because he doesn't want you to have hands on the purse strings and just wants you swinging your hammer and doing what you need to do, right? And then you go out into your own business and you've just got to learn through the School of Hard Knocks. And it can be really overwhelming, particularly this marketing piece, mate. So I'd love to talk a little bit about your journey, Matt. Take us back to the beginning. What got you into the trades in the first place, mate?
Probably unlike a lot of your audience, a lot like most of my audience, I was never considered an academic kid, which basically meant I sucked at school. I was always kind of the disruptive one, according to the scorecard. But I just didn't have an academic, that might surprise you, Jackson. I didn't, I was never really, that whole schooling system, which is so heavily geared towards academia, I never fit that profile. And I got through high school, finished, my final 12 in high school, whatever. And then I had that option. Well, do I go to university and struggle like I have done at school, or do I go and do something that I know I'll be good at, which is using my hands? And I thought, I'm just going to go and do a trade. I went out and found myself an apprenticeship as a plumber. I went straight into that and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I got this great job with a great company on the north shore of Sydney, did my apprenticeship there, and then a few stones in between. But I basically ended up taking my trade and working overseas. I went to Canada, I worked over there. I went to America, I worked over there. I went to the UK, I worked over there. I spent a bit of time in France. And I just had this like a great time applying that trade. And so, for anyone out there, it sort of formed, that whole journey kind of formed the whole foundation of the podcast, which I'll get to in a little bit. But like for anyone out there, perhaps it doesn't relate to you specifically, but I'm sure there's a lot of your audience out there that may have children that may be in a similar boat. And I would just love to communicate to them that doing a trade is such a valid option and it can open so many doors of opportunity. So don't be of that mindset just because you're an accountant, a lawyer, or whatever it might be, that your kids have to follow in that same path, because it's a really common mistake. And now, having kids myself, it's something that I'm really conscious of. Like, you want to be able to steer them in the direction that's going to best serve them, not serve you and your ego, regardless of what private school you went to in Sydney, right? So anyway, we after traveling throughout the UK, I came back and I started my own plumbing business, and I say it was my own plumbing business. I was doing a lot of contracting essentially to larger plumbing companies at the time, and some stuff on my own on the side. But I just kind of really at that point started taking an interest in business, and I started reading some books. And then I made the fatal mistake of reading a book called The 4-Hour Workweek.
Oh, no, good old Tim Ferriss strikes again.
and that pretty much set me on this path of exploration and investigation. And I realised at that point, I took a massive interest in business. I took a massive interest in time leverage, and I took a massive interest in concept of not being tied to location. Years later, I would meet my wife, who is from Canada. That's sort of where the rubber met the road with the agency. But in between now and then, it was always in the back of my mind, well, how do I put myself into a situation where I'm not necessarily tied to like my plumbing business in my plumbing location, which is what was happening at the time, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And in hindsight now, I look at it and I think I probably could do that now, because we've got the kids and we're sort of tied to location. At the time, it wasn't really that important. Anyway, so I ended up taking a job within a plumbing business, and we set up a company actually as a division of that business, and we were selling a technology to plumbers, which we were sourcing out of the Americas and Europe, and we were basically distributing throughout Asia Pacific. And it was kind of more of a sales and marketing role, and it really gave me some insight into business, and even though I was sort of running my own, it wasn't really running my own. I didn't really have to worry about anything to do with marketing, or I didn't have to worry about like accounting and that kind of stuff. So it really sort of gave me a bit of insight there. One of the big things that we saw was we would sell these systems to businesses that would be, in excess of, $200,000-$300,000, and we'd get these emails come through or a phone call, and they'd say, "Hey, listen, we've got all the stuff. It's great. If you don't help me sell this, I'm going to be sleeping in that trailer you built me." And so, the common thing I would say was, "Well, let's get it on your website." And I'm like, "Well, we haven't got a website." And I'd be like, "Well, okay, let's get your website then." And they're like, "Oh, how do I do that?" And I'm like, "I don't know." I mean, this was in truth going back, I suppose, 2007, or maybe it's 2007, 2008. And so a lot of businesses back then didn't have websites. And anyway, for a couple of them, I said, "Look, I'll just build one. I'll figure it out." And so I did. And then I did everything wrong. Again, like I threw the towel in on the job because I wasn't happy there. I saw an opportunity because I thought, well, there's a lot of businesses here that, are really good at what they do, but really bad at telling people how they do it. So I did everything wrong. I threw the towel in on the job. I basically sacrificed my entire income source at the time for going out on a hope and a dream. It was completely the wrong way to go about it. But, 12 years later, we're still in business, funnily enough. So where we started building websites for plumbers, we moved into websites for tradies, and then all of a sudden, we merged into marketing solutions because it became evident that, again, through School of Hard Knocks, when you ask enough questions, you realize what they actually want, which wasn't a website, it was their phone to ring. So we ended up, into full-scale marketing solutions. Yeah, so that'll let us to set up Tradie Web Guys. We've been running that for 12 years now, and basically run marketing and website solutions for trade businesses only, which includes everything from, websites, Google Ads, search engine optimization, which is really big, content creation, which we're going to touch on in today's podcast. We're full blown into sales and marketing CRM, so customer relationship or contact relationship management systems, which we've just about to release. Our one's about to come out of beta, which is going to be great. So yeah, we're sort of just taken this journey on like equipping trade businesses with anything to do with sales and marketing over the years. And while I was running the agency in the early days, I was doing some presentation at TAFE, which for you folks offshore, it's essentially where tradespeople get their certification in Australia. So it's where you go and do your apprenticeship and that kind of stuff. It's college, basically. I was presenting there as the certificate for students, which was basically the business module for people that are ready to go out or wanting to go out on their own. And I was talking to them a lot about web and, marketing and this kind of stuff. And I really loved it, the education side of things. And I thought, this is so good, except I'm speaking to 10 people here. I should be speaking to thousands, Thought back, this is in 2016 at the time, I thought, maybe I'll set up a podcast. And back then, podcasting, it was kind of in its infancy. It's a little bit more mainstream these days, but, I set up the SiteShed podcast in January of 2016, and, now we're 350 odd episodes in, and, one of the top 5 trade business podcasts in the world. And yeah, it's just been sort of, again, evolving into this thing. So here we are.
This is what I love about your journey, mate, is that it's just been really fortuitous of just one thing rolling into the next, which has been the right thing. But that doesn't really reflect most tradies' journeys, right?
It doesn't. And in truth, it probably shouldn't. The reality was I was probably never going to be a great plumber because I just didn't have the passion for it. And I didn't really, in hindsight, when I look back on, the time I did spend in it, I was quite good with people and I was quite good with management and things like that. But I was actually quite shit as a plumber. Pardon the pun. I look at some of my colleagues that I worked with, and I think, wow, they were just so good at their craft. And in hindsight, I probably wasn't. So getting out back then was probably a good thing for me because it made me get into something that I am better at. But again, Jackson, the message behind it all is, and going back to what I said right at the beginning of the podcast, is like entering into a trade can open so many windows of opportunity. 100%. And like if you had said to me back then when I started my apprenticeship in 1998, that's how old I am. You're going to end up in the education space, I would have laughed at you. But it's all through getting started, So it's all a journey. It's never a destination.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, I believe, because I think the common bucket that most tradies find themselves in is that they're very good at their craft. They're very, very good technicians. They've got a lot of experience. They go out on their own, they create a business, they inherit responsibility, and because they deliver a really great experience, they grow based on word of mouth. The thing that really bugs me is that they wear the fact that they don't market, that they don't spend any money on advertising, and they rely on word of mouth and referral as a badge of bloody honour. And it's great, like that you deliver such an amazing experience that your clients refer, but you have no control over that activity. Whereas when you're talking about your website, you're talking about SEO, you're talking about content, you're talking about PPC, all of these things that you can pump money in, and if you follow the system, it should pump money out. And ideally, it's a return on your ad spend. So talk to us, mate, in your experience I'm sure you've worked with thousands of tradies over the years, what are the biggest marketing mistakes that tradies make today?
The thing is, and again, this is what you don't know. And a lot of the people that we speak with, they don't know, right? Like, but you never taught this stuff. So again, it's a learning experience for them. At the crux of it is, yes, word of mouth is fantastic and one of the best forms of advertising. However, you will at some point, and we've run the numbers on this, and across the board, it varies obviously with different types of businesses where you've got big project businesses like builders where they might win $1 million job down to, your everyday, residential plumber who might charge $300 for a block drain or whatever it is. But on average, you'll exhaust your word of mouth network when you hit about 500K. You can rip in and you can really make that network productive and profitable to a point, but at some stage you're going to need leads and you're going to need customer acquisition and you're going to need to apply some form of marketing. Now, which form of marketing? In truth, no one really knows that. And like marketing is one of those things where you kind of got to throw mud against the wall and see what sticks. Like we know through best practice in the digital space what kind of gets the best return for the companies that we work with. But again, like it can be very different. You can run 2 parallel businesses next to each other, seemingly identical, and have a completely different marketing approach, and you don't really know. The first thing I'd like to say is anyone that tells you to stop doing something that's working, you should sack them or just immediately leave, because you see it all the time. People come to us and they're like, oh, we're running, newspaper ads, but we're going to put it all into digital marketing. And I'm like, that's insane. Why would you want to do that? And they're like, oh, I read it somewhere or I heard it, whatever. Like, no. If something's working, you can double down on it. But the point is, like, it's a game of testing and measuring. It's a game of, like, the key word in marketing really is optimization. And, like, it's about trying things. And if it works, optimize it. If it doesn't, then try something else. Like, you never really know. And you see it, over the last 15 years with the social media coming on the scene, like there was, like that was never a thing. And then all of a sudden something new's come in, and then all of a sudden people are leveraging it, and now people are finding, oh, maybe that's not actually working as well. Let's go back to some more traditional types of marketing. Like, it's always changing. It's a ever-growing landscape. I think, like, at the crux of, and the big message that I like to communicate with businesses, and in truth, out of the millions of people that are going to be watching this show, there might be a handful that are actually going to implement what we talk about here today.
Exactly.
But the reality is, like, people suck at telling their story. Like, as business owners, we suck at telling our story, and for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we think, like, it's an uncomfortable space for us. Like, we're not comfortable with whatever that looks like, whatever choice of media we use, whether it's writing a blog. Oh, I suck at writing. I'm a plumber. I'm a builder. I'm not good at writing. Okay, great. Excuse. Next. Okay, video. No, don't like video. I'm terrible in front of the camera. Okay, excuse. Next. Podcast. Oh, I don't speak very good England. I better not do that. But okay, great. Excuse. Next. So there's always these excuses, which in truth are they're all fabricated. Like, we make these things up. And the reason that we're not comfortable with them is because we don't do it, right? Like, it's not the first accounting client you took on board. It was probably your worst. Like, you get better with experience, right?
100%.
So it's one of these things where people and I think the problem is as well, they try and benchmark themselves against people that have been doing it for a long time, which of course subconsciously or consciously builds this fear and this apprehension. It gets in the way. Exactly.
Yeah, I heard this saying the other day. It was really great. It said, if you fight for your self-limiting beliefs, you get to keep them.
Mm.
And Jordan Peterson said in his book, 12 Lessons for Life, he said, be better than you were yesterday, but don't judge yourself for the idiot you are today.
Right.
And because we beat ourselves up, we're our own worst enemy. And I hear it all of the time, like, oh, yeah, I can't get in content, and I can't do this, and I don't articulate myself very well, and everyone's smarter than me. It becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. You'll prove yourself right. So what if the opposite was true?
Yeah, I can't think of the saying. I'm paraphrasing it, but like, it's something along the lines of whether you can do it or you can't do it, you're right.
Yes. Yeah, good old
something
Confucius.
Like that anyway.
Good old Confucius. Yeah. I love that one.
So anyway, let me just jump back here because I want to circle back to something. So before we start talking about like the right and wrong things in relation to marketing, because again, that's kind of a gambit. You've just got to try and see, what works and try different things. But like at the crux of it all is the fact that most business owners, and this is not just relevant to trade, it's most business owners, they suck at telling their story. And the first thing that we just touched on then is because they've got these fabricated fears. The second thing is because they think that we think as business owners that what we do is not interesting. Now, you've got to consider the situation where people are coming to you for a service or they're coming to you for information. Like we take, for example, like one of the most common conversations we have is with like our builder clients. And they think that what they're doing is boring because they're under this illusion that they build homes. When the reality is, like what they're doing is that, like, first and foremost, they're dealing with people that are probably spending the largest or second largest investment they're ever going to spend in their entire life. And second of all, they're not just building homes, they're like building lifestyles. They're creating like these people's dreams for them. And because they do this every day, they swing hammers and they pitch roofs, climbing ladders, like they just think, well, this is boring, but it's not boring. It's extremely interesting, especially to someone who's about to drop, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of dollars with that person. So people are coming to us as business owners and as providers for information. Yet here we are neglecting that privilege by not giving it to them. So the biggest thing I think that, like, if I can communicate one message to people out there across vertical, doesn't matter what industry you're in, it's get better at telling your story. Because alternatively, on the flip side of that, if you're trying to compete against competition and you're not doing a good job of telling your story, then guess what? You're competing against them in Google Ads, you're competing against them in SEO, you're competing against them in all this other stuff, which if you put in one big basket, it's noise. So if you want to stand out and you want to become the go-to expert, if you want to build trust and authority, if you want to build rapport, if you want people to come to you as a trusted advisor, educate, tell your story. Don't just sell, just educate, be useful, be relevant, be recent, be frequent.
This is a game changer, mate. Like, we've even done this in our own business. So people working with us, it's a big emotional commitment. There's a lot of perceived risk because we're dealing with life-changing decisions. And telling that story, sharing the experience, educating them through it, and removing the friction and the resistance is the key to getting people to say yes. And it doesn't matter if you're a plumber or an electrician or a builder, and your clients want to be educated. They want to know that you're the right person to be able to help them achieve the outcomes and that you're not going to stuff them over and they're not going to be one of those horror stories that they've seen, like come across their news feed on Facebook. It's so important. And I think this is the thing, right? When you do what you do every day, you sometimes forget the magic of it. Whereas your clients, they don't deal with this. It's probably one of a handful of times, if they're lucky, that they're going to work with somebody like yourself, right?
And here's the thing, right? Even when you do work with somebody like ourselves, and we're massive on this, and we like bust chops to get information on people so we can tell their stories better. But at the end of the day, like what we find is until the business owner or the representative who's basically championing this project, until they make what we're talking about part of the process, it will never, ever, ever happen. It will always get relegated on the list of important things to do, right behind ducking up to the shop to get smoko and going to the pub on Friday afternoon. So, this is one of those conversations, Jackson, which in truth, although we're kind of talking a lot about the marketing side of things today, we're not really. Like we're talking about, it becomes a leadership, it becomes a project management, it becomes a macro business process conversation, because like as business owners, we have to appreciate that if you want the outcome, you got to do the thing. Now, whatever that looks like, it doesn't matter. If you're not comfortable in front of the camera, who cares? It's not about like whether you're comfortable. It's about getting the thing, right? If you're not a confident writer, it doesn't matter. It's about the thing, right? So whether you do it yourself or you get someone else to do it, the point is get it done and stop making excuses why you can't. And when you come to an agency like us and you say, okay, we want this and this, like we can do certain things, but it still has to become part of your process. I need to know your story. I need to know about the job you've done, and we can help you communicate that. But if that doesn't become part of your process internally, then it still won't get done properly because we have no way of knowing these things, right? So I always put the pressure back on the whoever's championing the campaign here at the business end, because I say, listen, we will do all of this stuff if we have the information from you, and we've got a bloody good process around getting it from you, but you still have to show up.
It's so important. The same thing happens with us, mate. And I think the problem is because people see it as being complicated, they think they can just abdicate responsibility around their marketing and their money. And it's a 50-50 partnership because it's never going to be as good. Like, sure, we could probably make it up, but what's the point? It's not your story. It's not your message. It doesn't represent who you are and the business that you're trying to create. So you need to be involved. And sure, it's a little bit of friction, but it's a worthwhile skill. So I couldn't agree more, mate. So let's talk a little bit about websites. I've seen some ugly websites in my day. Websites that look like they were built back in 1983, that just are not in the modern age, that don't really represent a good brand and just scream alarm bells. So I know we could probably spend hours talking about this, mate, but what makes a powerful website that converts, if you had to summarize it?
So what I would say is, I'm not going to go into the intricate conversion factors that you need to have on a website for it to perform well today. If you want to find out more information about that, go and find the top 5 of your competitors that are killing it in their market and have a look at their websites. It's easy to get that information, right? There's things that you need to have on sites like, it's got to be mobile responsive. You click to call phone numbers, your opt-in forms. You've got to have all this stuff happening on the site. Then you've got to have things that happen off the site so that when you do get traffic to it, that it actually converts into a lead or an inquiry or whatever it might be, okay? But like importantly, you've got to understand, well, when people come to my website, what is it they're coming for? And are we communicating and making that journey as quickly and as efficiently as we can for them to basically get them the answers they're looking for, right? This is the thing that most people don't consider. And, it is an evolving space as well. Like this is something that, I suppose the listeners and viewers need to take into consideration. Like this conversation should never be, again, about a destination. Like you should look at your website as a business asset, as something that you can serve and it can evolve and you can use to tell your story, and it can really treat it like that. Like so many people have this mentality that the website is like a one and done thing, right? Oh, I've got it. Why did you get it? Oh, because my competitors have got it. Well, no, that's the wrong attitude,
Yes.
So we like to treat the business website more as a marketing launch pad. it's the platform where you can lay your foundations and you can really start building from that. And like whatever that looks like for the business, like it could, I mean, if you don't have the foundations laid, it's really hard for you to say down the track, well, okay, let's do some marketing, let's do SEO, let's do some Google ads, let's put a lead magnet on there, let's do some Facebook campaigns. Like everything will eventually come back to your website. It doesn't matter what you do. You could be, somebody sees you driving down the street and, you know, you've got your logo on the door, and we know statistically they're 8 times more likely to pull out their phone and Google the company than call the number they've seen under the logo. Like, you've got to consider the ecosystem, and you've got to consider, like, are you actually answering the questions that people asking? When you say, like, you know, when we talk about best practice on a website, ultimately it's about helping people get answers to the questions they've got, right?
Yes.
So typically what you see on a website is things like, some of the biggest mistakes I can tell you right now are when people think, I know what I'll do. I'll put on websites things that I think people are going to want to hear, which in truth just make them look cheesy, and it communicates permission to play. And what I mean by permission to play is when you go to someone's website and you see things like, we are trustworthy, we are upfront and honest, we are reliable, we offer, you know, honest pricing, like things like, you think, well, if you're in business, you would hope that's the case, right? Like, you can't market that stuff, right?
No.
You see it like replicated into things like our values, you know, like sometimes they become, it just becomes so cliche, and it becomes like it's sort of so obvious that it's just like robotic, that it's almost a deterrent, right? This is not helping you tell your story. What's helping you tell your story is your story. And everyone has a unique story, and that story is always changing. And that should be what you should be focusing on. You know, if you want to like make your website look different, like talk about how your business is different. Like when we do deep dives into some of our organizations, I'll give you a prime example. Like, we're working with a plumbing company at the moment. They are, as we found out, purely commercial maintenance plumbers, right? And they cover pretty much the entire eastern seaboard of Australia, which essentially means they don't work for homeowners. They don't work for mums and dads. They work for property managers, like big companies like Westfield, and like these huge companies, right? They've got a really good process around it. When we did our initial brief, we didn't capture enough of that information, right? So when we got the website revision back to them, they're like, this looks really great, except this. So then I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So again, your business is a work in motion and nothing's perfect. So always, when something happens like this in your organization, be receptive to it and adapt it to change, right? So, you know, we implement a whole bunch of different processes on the onboarding stage now, so we can mitigate these problems looking forward, which has been a fantastic experience for us. And now we look at their what they've got as an asset, as their website, and it communicates with 100% clarity what they do and who they do it for. Now, and along the way, we were able to incorporate things that we had to extract from them with pliers, which was process things that separate them from their competitors, because they do things that other businesses do not do, but they didn't think it was marketable. But it is marketable and it's defining. And so you guys out there are sitting there going, we're just your standard whatever, like corner shop or whatever it might be, but there's things that you guys do which are defining, and you need to articulate that and you need to communicate it on your marketing launchpad, which is your website. And then, of course, then you can replicate that into your marketing as well. So, you know, you can send these things out into, you know, across different mediums through email marketing or video or whatever it is you're doing to build your tribe or your community or whatever. Like, the point I'm trying to make is, if you've got the foundation laid and you've got the content created on that foundation, then you're in a position where you can really syndicate it wherever you want by driving people back to your website, which is inevitably where you want them to end up.
Yes. And I think the big challenge I see here, mate, because we've experienced this ourselves, try and be vague on purpose because you don't want to deter people, but that gets the exact opposite result that you really want. Like, the more specific you can be and the more people you deter, then the more qualified the people who do opt in and do take the next step are. And it's even for us, like we've had Aureus now for nearly 5 years, and it's just been constant iterations and improvement, dialing in that marketing message, dialing in the story, dialing in the positioning, so we can make sure that we're attracting the right people and we're repelling the wrong people. And it's good that people say no, because you can't do everything for everyone. It just doesn't work that way, right?
And we typically find, and you probably were in the same position, I was in the same position, like in the early stages of business. And again, like I was saying before, you throw heaps of mud against the wall and you see what sticks. In truth, we don't really work with a whole lot of startups. I know when we have, they don't really know. They'll come and say, oh, we're plumbers and we do everything. And you go, okay, well, that's great, but it's a marketing nightmare because you're trying to position yourself as the go-to guy for everything when that's never going to be a reality. But what you typically find is as the business starts gaining momentum and it starts moving, it will tend to navigate towards different areas of business, which help you really define your avatar and really define your service and your offering and what your customer looks like. That then becomes part of your marketing message, right? So as your business evolves, that message will evolve with it. And over time, it will get clearer and clearer. And like you said, it becomes then a game of, it's not necessarily like a game of more leads. And we do this a lot, especially with like clients that do project-based work like builders. Like they don't have a lead problem. They've got a qualification problem, right? So they're having these conversations with people that are coming to them saying, oh, yeah, I want to renovate my home. And they're going, great, come in for a coffee and we'll sit down, we'll discuss it. And they get in there and they figure out that the person hasn't organized finance. They haven't got any drawings done. They haven't got an architect. They haven't got an engineer. They haven't got anything. Like they're nowhere near ready to have the conversation with the builder, yet here they are wasting everyone's time. And through no fault of their own, it's just because the builder hasn't qualified them properly. The game actually becomes, and we're the same, as it's a qualification process, it's also a disqualification process, yes. Which essentially means what you're doing is when you get to a point where you're not looking for more leads, you're looking for less, but more of the right quality. And that is a prolific game changer. And it impacts the business on every single level, from customer acquisition, delivery, right through to financial side of the business, because it's so important and it's something that so many businesses get wrong.
I think it comes down to just knowing your numbers. Like we do this process of reverse engineering with our clients, because I think many people, when they get to this point and say, if I want to grow, I need more leads. Sure, you do, but you'd prefer to have better quality leads. So let's reverse engineer it backwards and actually work out what those numbers need to be, assuming that they're the right lead. And then we take it right back to the beginning. And look, there does get to a point where people run out of a pool to work with and they do need to fill that top of the funnel. And I know that the first time that I built a website, Matt, I didn't know how this stuff worked. I just thought that I'd build it and they would come. And then it was like just tumbleweeds going by. I'd look at my Google Analytics and there was no bloody traffic. And I'm like, why isn't the Google just sending me people? Like, where are these people? It doesn't work that way. So I know we're strapped for time, mate, but I just want a really high-level view of what are the traffic sources that trade businesses should be considering, not necessarily pursuing, but they should be considering that are going to help them drive traffic to their new beautiful website that communicates their message to the right people.
Okay, so the thing that I suppose is really important that people understand is the difference between organic traffic and paid traffic. It's really important that they understand the dynamic here, because organic traffic, or sometimes you would have heard the term SEO or search engine optimization, what it basically means is it's people that are coming to your website not through a paid source. If somebody types something into Google, your website should appear for that term, which is SEO. Now, like under the paid section of I'm not going to go too much into the Google landscape, but like basically it means organic traffic, which essentially is there, and it's a little bit more of a sustainable traffic source, okay? Paid traffic means if somebody clicks on an ad they've seen for a block drain in Brisbane, that if your ad appears, they click on that and you get charged for it. Now, that is also very, very useful and a really good tool, but once your budget runs out, you disappear off the face of the internet. So there's no right or wrong here, but it's important that people understand what they both do and how you can use them either individually or together. So again, throw mud against the wall and see what sticks. There's a lot of data you can pull out of Google and out of these search tools that we use and reporting and all this kind of stuff to give our clients a really good indication of, what systems we should be using and in what situation. But at the crux of it, I think for the better part, the crux of organic search comes from content. And so going back to what we said early in the piece, telling your story is about creating content, and it's about creating useful content. Now, once you get in that cadence, then you can apply the secondary to creating useful content is, okay, well, then how do we apply meta and how do we apply best practice to this piece of content so it has a chance of showing up on the search engine. And that, in truth, is kind of the job of a marketing person. They should know how to do that. But it's not the most important part of it. The most important part of it is creating useful content that people are actually going to wanting to consume. And then you can apply, SEO tactics to that piece of content so that it stands a chance of showing up in search. Very often you'll see people go down that path of, I'm just going to go put a blog on my plumbing website and talk about all these terms that people are going to search. In truth, anyone that goes to a plumber's blog, like the only reason that exists is for SEO. Like no one really cares about a plumber's blog. What they really care about is a job that they've completed or, a client they've worked with or something like that, right? So you've got to be discerning and you've got to put yourself in the shoes of your customers sometimes and think, okay, well, and yes, they both serve a purpose. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that having a blog on your website is incorrect. I'm just saying think like your customer, like what's more useful, because you can apply some of these tricks and tactics and, techniques for, from an SEO marketing perspective, content creation perspective, you can apply it to all different areas of your website or your content strategy in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be your website. It could be YouTube videos. It could be a number of different things, right? So I would say clearly define what the message is, clearly define what it is, what you do, who you serve, and how you do it, and then let that help you dictate that content strategy looking forward. Again, it's not really that important, like the medium that you use. It's more important that you're communicating like what it is you're communicating and who to. Do you know what I mean?
Makes perfect sense, mate. And I think this is the problem. So many people get overwhelmed by choice and they just go, stuff it. I'm throwing my hands up. I'm just going to do nothing. They do something once and they go, I didn't get results. And then they stop doing it, which is the reason why it's so important for these businesses to be working with someone like you, Matt.
It is a long game. Like some of these things, and this is why I was saying to you before, like it's got to become part of a process. It's got to become part of the actual mission, the strategy. Like, because if it's one of those things where, we'll try it for a month and see if it works, it won't work. Like nothing, you can't try anything for a month and expect it to work. Like you've got to execute these things as part of a strategy and give it the time it deserves. And then which replicates back into, what you deal with largely on the financial side of the business. Well, okay, we've got to make allowance for this stuff. Like we appreciate that this might take time and we've got to budget this in, So there's that whole educational side of things comes in when you're trying to communicate with people. Well, this is the result. This is the time that it's likely going to take to get us there. Are you comfortable with that? Can you budget for that? Like, you know what I mean?
And I think the thing we talk to our clients about, like as a benchmark, all businesses should be spending about 7% of top line revenue on marketing. Now, if you can spend less and get the result that you want, awesome, great. But then on the flip side as well, we've got some clients who spend more than that, but they've got a marketing machine that provides them with a predictable return on marketing spend. So as a result, they're happy to spend more because they're not just kind of throwing money into a machine that they're not sure what's going to be produced. There's so many businesses that aren't tracking that.
Often you'll find, Jackson, as well, like initially it might cost you more with a marketing budget because you're trying different things and you haven't yet had the ability to optimize and refine the campaigns to focus on what works. And once you do that, you can actually reduce budget. And a lot of what I'm talking about here today is like, you don't necessarily need an agency to do this stuff. Like I'm telling you guys to go and tell your story. Like you don't need me to write that piece of content for you. Go and do it yourself. But the point I'm trying to communicate is just someone do it. Now, yes, you probably do need a specialist who can help you with SEO because it's an insanely technical and tediously boring, repetitive program. And Google Ads as well. Like it's really easy to burn money running a Google Ads campaign if you don't know what you're doing. The crux of what we're talking about here, like from a foundational perspective, we're talking about telling your story and you're the only one who can really do that.
So important. So, mate, if anybody's listened to this, watched this episode and they've liked what you had to say, how do they get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to reach out?
Two ways. If you want to tune into the podcast, The Site Shed is it. We're The Site Shed across every platform. Just type it into Google and you'll find us. If you are a trade business and you want to have a chat about some of the things that we've discussed here, or you even want to run through our opportunity assessment, which is basically a series of audits that we run for your asset to pinpoint exactly where some of the opportunities do lie in your digital marketing space, just head across to tradiewebguys.com.au. It's tradiewebguys.com.au. And again, we're Tradie Web Guys across every medium. We're really ramping up our YouTube presence at the moment. So you can head over there to consume lots of content, case studies, and that kind of stuff. But I'm really not that hard to find.
Fantastic. Mate, this has been super valuable. I think this is just something that's super important in this day and age that we're in right now. Times are going to get tough, and you need to be able to stand out and make sure that you've got a business that can survive the turbulent times to come, particularly when you're in the trade space, and making sure that you're partnered with the right team to help you with your money. Your marketing is going to be critically important, guys. So remember, a good idea in theory remains exactly that, just a good idea until you put it into place. So go take action and make sure that you get in touch with Matt and the team. Matt, I appreciate it, mate. I appreciate the time and looking forward to catching up again soon.
Absolutely. And if you have any follow-up questions on the listeners or viewers, happy to come back on the show and answer some questions.
Would love to, mate. I'd love to have you back. Guys, it's been another episode of the Financial Freedom Secrets podcast, and we will catch you next time.